Three of Ryan Carter's coworkers stood outside the coffee shop window like they were watching a show. They had set the whole thing up a blind date, carefully arranged, with one detail left out on purpose. The woman inside was deaf. They wanted to see Ryan, the coldest man in the office, stumble through an awkward silence he couldn't talk his way out of. But when Olivia Bennett smiled and raised her hands to sign her greeting, Ryan didn't freeze. He signed back, fluid, calm, unhesitating. Outside the glass, the laughter died before it started. Ryan Carter was not someone people talked to unless they had to. He showed up at the office every morning with his coffee already in hand, sat at his desk, and worked. He didn't take long, lunches, didn't join the birthday cake circles in the break room, and had never once attended a company happy hour. His coworkers had stopped inviting him after the third decline. It wasn't that he was hostile, he was simply elsewhere, even when he was standing right in front of you. He answered questions directly, solved problems cleanly, and left no room for anything beyond that. Nobody really knew where he lived, what he did on weekends, or whether he had anyone in his life outside the office. His manager, Greg, had once described him as the most efficient person I've ever wanted to have a real conversation with, and never could. He was 31 years old, a senior software engineer at a mid-sized tech firm in Seattle, and he had built his life around a principle most people never bother to name: don't give more than what the situation requires. Olivia Bennett had moved to Seattle 6 weeks earlier, carrying 2 suitcases and a freelance design contract that gave her enough runway to decide whether the city was worth staying in. She had spent the past 4 years in Portland, working remotely for clients she rarely met in person, which suited her well. She was deaf, had been since she was 19, the result of a sudden illness that the doctors handled correctly, but not quickly enough. She didn't describe herself that way in introductions. She described herself as a designer first, and let everything else surface naturally, or not at all. She was sharp, in the way that people become when they learn to read a room without relying on sound. She watched hands' eyes the small tension in someone's jaw when they said something they didn't quite mean. She had been told more than once that being around her felt like being seen too clearly, and she had learned to take that as a compliment, even when it wasn't meant as one. Dana Marsh had known Ryan from a previous job 3 years back, before he moved firms. She had since become loosely connected to Olivia through a mutual design community, and when Olivia mentioned she was new to Seattle and didn't know many people, Dana did what Dana always did. She tried to fix that. She reached out to Ryan with a short message: "I know someone you might actually get along with. Coffee, no pressure." Ryan had agreed, which surprised Dana slightly. She didn't know that he agreed precisely, because she said, "No pressure," and because she was one of the few people he trusted not to turn a simple coffee into something he'd have to manage. What Dana didn't know, what she had no reason to know, was that she wasn't the only one who knew about the meeting. Marcus Webb had overheard Dana's message. Not intentionally, he'd been standing near Ryan's desk when the notification came through, and Ryan had glanced at his phone without locking the screen first. Marcus saw the name, the message, and the word, coffee. That was enough. He had been looking for a way to crack Ryan's composure for 2 years, the way some people fixate on a locked door, not because they need what's inside, but because the lock itself bothers them. Marcus was that kind of person. He made a few calls, found out through a mutual contact that the woman Dana was setting Ryan up with was deaf, and immediately saw the shape of something he thought was funny. He brought it to Stephanie Cole, who laughed in the way people laugh when they're not sure something is appropriate, but don't want to be the one who says so. By Thursday evening, there were 3 of them with a plan: show up at the coffee shop stand outside and watch Ryan Carter, the man who always had an answer for everything, sit across from a woman he couldn't speak to and have absolutely nothing to offer. The coffee shop was called Birch and Ground, a narrow place on Capitol Hill with floor-to-ceiling windows along the front. Marcus had chosen the meeting spot himself under the guise of knowing a good place, which he'd passed along to Dana, who passed it along to Ryan. The windows made it perfect. You could stand outside and see everything without being seen, especially in the low afternoon light. Ryan arrived first. He ordered a black coffee, chose a table near the window, not knowing why that particular table felt right, and waited. He sat with his phone face down on the table, which was a habit, not a statement. Outside, Marcus positioned himself against the building across the street, with Stephanie and a third co-worker named Trevor beside him. Marcus already had his phone out to record. Olivia arrived at 3 minutes past the hour. She was wearing a dark green jacket and carrying a canvas tote that had a small smudge of paint near the strap, the kind of detail you only noticed if you were already paying attention. She spotted Ryan from the doorway, recognized him from the photo Dana had sent, and walked over. When she reached the table, she smiled, set down her bag, and brought her hands up to sign. "Hi." "You must be Ryan. I'm Olivia." Ryan looked at her hands. He looked at her face, and then, without any hesitation that anyone watching could detect, he signed back. "It's good to meet you. Sorry if I'm a little slow. I haven't used ASL regularly in a while." His signs were clean, not perfect, slightly, careful in the way of someone who learned something thoroughly, and then let it sit for a few years, but completely functional and entirely natural. Olivia's expression shifted, not dramatically, just a small, genuine recalibration, the kind that happens when you realize the situation is different from what you prepared for. She signed back that he was doing fine, and gestured toward the chair across from her. Outside, Marcus lowered his phone. Stephanie said something he didn't quite catch. Trevor made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something else. None of them had a next move. The joke had required Ryan to be helpless, and he wasn't, and that was the whole thing. There was nothing left to watch. They stayed at that table for 2 hours and 40 minutes. Ryan had not planned for that. He had planned for 45 minutes, maybe an hour, which was the outer limit he usually set for social obligations. But Olivia was not an obligation, and the conversation was not the kind that followed a script. She told him about the design work she was doing, branding projects for small businesses, mostly the kind of clients who needed someone to translate what they meant into something a stranger could understand at a glance. She said that was the part she liked best, the translation problem. Ryan understood that immediately in a way that surprised him. He told her that was essentially what he did with code, take something messy and human and turn it into something that worked without anyone having to explain it. Olivia looked at him steadily when he signed that and nodded once, as if she'd already thought the same thing and was glad to hear it confirmed. Ryan was a careful signer. He chose his words with the same precision he used when he wrote code, and when he wasn't sure of a sign, he fingerspelled without embarrassment. At one point, Olivia corrected a sign he'd used slightly wrong, the one for specific, and he repeated it back correctly, and she gave a small nod of approval that felt more like respect than praise. That distinction mattered to him, though he didn't examine why. It was near the end of the second hour that something shifted. Ryan had been mostly present in the conversation, but a part of his attention had been doing what it always did, processing the background. He had noticed early on that the table he'd chosen was directly in the sightline of the street. He had registered without consciously flagging it that Marcus Webb's car was parked on the block outside. He had seen in his peripheral vision 3 figures standing across the street for the first 20 minutes before they apparently gave up and left. He had filed it away and said nothing because there was nothing to say yet, and because Olivia was talking about something that was worth paying attention to. But by the time they were finishing their second round of drinks, he had assembled the full shape of it. Dana had told him the location. Marcus had somehow known about the location. Marcus had known about Olivia. The only information that connected all of those points was that Marcus had found out Olivia was deaf and decided that was the punchline. Ryan sat with that for a moment, the way he sat with a piece of code that had a flaw somewhere quietly, without moving until the location of the problem became obvious. He had 2 options. He could let it go. He had come to a coffee meeting. The meeting had gone well, and he could walk away from it